Evening, everybody. Today we'll be looking at Calme, Black Dragon in a Gentle Kingdom. Wow, that's a mouthful. There are many ways to make a story stand out. Nowadays it's easy for everything to blend together, so coming up with new ways of telling old stories is becoming more and more necessary as time goes on. More and more shows and books are trying to be dark and gritty, while others try to come off as parodies or satires by pointing out all the cliches and tropes and laughing at them. I bring this up because easily the most annoying thing about Calme is that it's a good example of doing the latter to the point of getting annoying. There's parodying a cliche, and then there's straight up being a cliche and trying to pass off otherwise. It tries so hard to ironically roll its eyes at itself that it got on my nerves enough that I decided to open this video ranting about it instead of speaking disjointedly about something vaguely related and segue in like I always do. Moving on to the topic at hand, Calme. When you get right down to it, Calme's acceptable. Okay. Passable. Average. It gets the job done. It's nothing special though. The game opens with a simple but effective premise. One day 5 strangers are brought together by a mysterious girl and are granted the power to control a giant monster called an avatar. Shortly after, they're thrown into a world of people who control these creatures and their problems and must decide what they want to do with their newfound powers. There's a lot of interesting ideas tossed around right off the bat, with some people wanting to keep all the avatar groups, called communes, under control and live peacefully. Some people just want to band all the communes together into an army. And of course, the people who just want to use their newfound power to fuck everything up. There's a lot of potential for some really awesome stuff down the line, and Calme really doesn't do much with it. Despite all the different ideas and groups being thrown around, the plot is basically Pokemon, with some people wanting to use their monsters for good and some for evil. This gets even more ridiculous when the game starts naming off the different character classes, and how to level up the avatars and all this other nonsense. Don't get me wrong, if all Calme is a bunch of giant monsters beating up each other, then that's fine. I can definitely get behind a couple of dragons fighting. I've heard of way worse ways of making Pokemon better. The problem is, despite having all this potential for great action and story, Calme doesn't really do anything with it. We have a lot of build-up, but very little actual payoff. A huge bulk of the game is spent with characters talking to each other about things totally unrelated to all the monsters and communes. Normally this wouldn't be a problem for me, but the actual fantasy element in this game is treated more like a background to the regular slice-of-life bits instead of the other way around, and after the introduction, that was not what I was excited for. There's underground Calme fights, a killer who can kill avatars with their bare hands, a sword who strikes down avatars like the force of God, and yet 70% of this story is spent with characters hanging around somewhere around town and talking about normal everyday things. To its credit, they are interesting conversations, and the cast is a fun one to work with. The standout for me was easily the main girl of the game, Calme, who right off the bat established herself as a harsh, mean-spirited badass of a woman who could take down anyone and look down on everyone and everything around her. So for a masochist like me, she is literally perfect. Another great person who never failed to grab my attention was Gasai, but unfortunately he fell into that trap of not getting enough screen time, though he dominated every scene he was in. That's not to undersell everyone else, mind you. All the characters come off as detailed and complex to some extent and have their own ideals that made them all unique. The only downside of this being that many of these characters don't get nearly the attention they deserve. Outside of the main 6 or 7 characters, many of the others don't get nearly the amount of screen time they deserve, and as a result it left many of the routes feeling unfinished or rushed in some way. The only exception to this is the final route, which is genuinely good and by far the best part of the game, but even that didn't touch on everything. Aside from 2 or 3 names and some basic ideals told to us right at the beginning, you never learn much about any of the different Calme organizations, and despite how important they apparently are, we never actually see them do all that much. We're told there's going to be a war and that we need to pick a side, but we never actually do that, and once shit actually does hit the fan, it's because of something else entirely. Despite spending so much time talking, I learned next to nothing about any of these characters, and that's really a shame. Have I mentioned length yet? Calme is about 50 hours of reading spread out over 5 different routes. 50 hours. Even including the setup of the common route, that's still over 9 hours per route. I've read 9-hour stories that have killed the entire cast, introduced, established, and defeated an entire organization in that time. I can marathon an entire show and learn everything about dozens of characters in the world they live in 9 hours. Yet we still have underdeveloped people in this? The fuck? I mean, if the stories we did get were great, I wouldn't mind this, but needless to say, they aren't anything to hit home about. None of the routes are bad. In fact, there's a lot to like in each of them, but the more I read, the more it bothered me that things that seemed important and interesting weren't getting explained or covered. Most of the routes revolve entirely around ideas introduced in that same route, and put little to no thought or effort into building or closing up ideas that were set up in the introductory common route. Like I said, the last route actually does do this a bit, but that's still 1 route out of 5. What went wrong? It sucks, since the last route is filled with intense and awesome action and drama nearly the entire way through, and it's a fantastic payoff to everything I read before it. This could have been the entire game. At its core, Calme has the potential to be a fantastic game, and the last route is a good example of the kind of potential it has. There are just so many other things that get in the way of it. It's also strangely repetitive despite being slightly longer than the Great Wall of China. I wish I had a nickel for every time someone pointed out a cliche, made a video game reference, or talked disjointedly about gentle kingdoms and the color red. It got to the point I actually started to keep a tally whenever it happened, but I lost interest somewhere in the 30s. I can't just sit down and rant about everything wrong with it though. As many problems as Calme has, what it does do well. The roots themselves are well written and manage to keep things entertaining to the very end. They just have the G-Central problem of not dealing with topics or ideas as interesting as the main story. I mean, they have a fucking dragon and I'm sitting here learning about otakus in one route. And while there are a number of characters who desperately needed more screen time, those who do get it make the most of it. There isn't really a bad character in the bunch, just people who are less good or less interesting. There was never a point when I dreaded having to listen to a character, no matter how often they crept up I always found something they said interesting, if nothing else. The slice of life bits with characters just talking about everyday things were genuinely good, even if they were overshadowing the Avatar fights. And the fights. Oh man, the fights. Say whatever you will about Calme, but seeing a dragon fight other giant monsters will never not be fantastic. I mean, sure, it's a visual novel and most of it is imagination, but they capture that visceral joy perfectly, and they were always a joy to read through. There are more than a few moments when I was on the edge of my seat clicking my way through text as fast as I can just to see what would happen next in the fight. I may find fault with it, but really, Calme isn't that bad of a game. Is it run-of-the-mill and has a lot of problems? Absolutely, but honestly, what doesn't? At the end of the day, gun to my head, if you asked me whether or not I enjoyed Calme, I would say yes. I just find it sad, because it is good, but it could be so much better. If you were to ask me to summarize my honest thoughts on Calme, I would say it's a good game with lots of untapped potential. There were a lot of different characters and angles that could have been given more time and development, more ideas about communes and how to use their avatars, get more in depth with the different factions aside from just the surface level. There were a lot of things they could have done to make this more interesting, but as it stands, Calme to me feels a lot like a missed opportunity. Feel free to check it out and decide for yourself whether or not I'm crazy, but this is definitely one I won't be talking much about. I'd say unless you're a real diehard or think you'll adore it, you ought to pass this one up. See you guys next time.